Hi everybody, welcome to this talk. My name's Rachel. I am otherwise known as Writerin here on Medium. I predominantly cover issues relating to trans topics, feminism, a little bit of entertainment thrown in for good measure. I've been on the platform for about 5 or 6 years now. And I tend to post at least 3 or 4 times a week, normally on about trans topics. I have been spotlighted a couple of times, but today I wanted to share more about my approach to writing. Feel free to put any questions to me. I'm happy to answer anything as we go through. I have got a bit of a list that I'm happy to share with you some tips and hints, but primarily I wanted to just talk through what it is to be a trans writer on here and how I've been building my audience over the last couple of years. The first tip I could really give is provoke your audience. Don't just state something. Give your audience a chance to think about it. A lot of the issues, especially around trans people in 2023, are very provocative, and especially with the way the media has been covering trans identities. As a trans person talking about this, it's not simply about what other people want to hear, but it's also bringing your personal experience into it. I know if you read any of the articles I've written, you'll quickly see that I weave a lot of my own personal experiences into it, but also because I'm also a PhD researcher, my research is looking at how trans rights are perceived by the media. I consume an awful lot of media on a day-to-day basis. So what I don't want to do is just regurgitate what other people are saying. I want to be able to bring something new to the table that other people can engage with. And this also brings on to the point that being trans is only one part of who I am as a person. I'm also quite well-rounded. I've hit the age where I've got a lot of experiences I can draw upon when I talk about issues, but I'm also acutely aware that there are many other perspectives that are outside of my own. And so when I'm writing about this, what I'm trying to do is engage people on their own level and give people a space to bring themselves into that conversation. And last week I wrote a piece on being a trans woman who plays sport, and it happened to get spotlighted by Medium. And it was interesting how normally I get maybe 4 or 5 people commenting on my articles, if that. But I think I've got over 20 people so far have commented on it. And it's interesting how I was shying away from talking about it in a lot of my writing because I don't necessarily want to be outed as a trans sports person. However, given the comments that people have been making more generally about trans women playing women's sports, I think it was very pertinent for me to talk about at that particular moment in time. Which also leads me on to the next topic, that there's a difference between honesty and oversharing. And sometimes it can be difficult to balance out the two. Certain articles I've written have explored my personal history in quite a lot of depth, especially my relationships. And for me, I don't feel like that's oversharing. I try to calibrate it enough that the way that the audience can engage with it is relatable, not just being treated as something which is look at me, this is what I'm doing. I try to weave in that personal narrative into something where people can then relate back to it, and then if they want to ask a question or make a comment, they've got the space to do that. While at the same time being honest to who I am as a person. There are certain things I won't share, and there's certain things I do definitely keep in the background and I wouldn't put online. But I'm also aware that there are things that I have no shame in talking about, I've got no fear in talking about. And as a trans person, I think it's important that I'm not just showing either the worst things to be trans about or the best things to be trans about. There's always that area in the middle that is worth exploring. And that also brings me on to the next point, which trans voices are intersectional. There is no one way of being trans, and it's especially a platform like Medium. There is plenty of scope for all different trans voices. It was interesting. Safni and I posted an article looking at contentious trans topics, and I cross-referenced, cross-posted it onto Reddit, and people giving me feedback on Reddit that I wouldn't normally get on Medium, and I have to remind myself all the time when I'm responding to feedback, when I'm taking on board critiques of what I'm writing, that there are many different perspectives and many different trans voices out there, and that what I'm putting out into the world is just my personal perspective. Yet I also, when I'm writing, because I transitioned in 2000, there's this 25 years of history that I've got behind me, and sometimes it's difficult to see things very black and white. I'm a lot more nuanced in my thinking than I was when I first transitioned. So when I put that into writing, it means that sometimes it can come across as I'm equivocating, or I'm being too centrist, I'm being too moderate. And I have to accept that and understand that other people are not always going to be happy or wanting to engage with what I'm writing. So the best piece of advice I can give you is don't read too much into what other people are saying to you. Don't take it to heart if someone disagrees with you. You're never going to be able to please everybody who's reading what you're saying. And so be yourself. I think it's my next point, is what you think and how you approach life is how you approach life. You can't radically alter that. Of course, we all grow and change and shift our perspectives. But when you as a writer will develop your own voice, which you then bring to the table. And if other people choose to engage with it, so be it. However, if you feel that what you are doing isn't quite hitting the spot, then maybe you're not finding the right audience for what you're doing. Maybe there are different audiences that you can be approaching, or conversely, you can tailor what you're writing. But ultimately, you still have to be authentic to yourself. You can't radically alter who you are as a person. Which also then brings back to being provocative. It's not a bad thing to make a statement, but then calibrating it for your audience, or the intended audience you want to bring to the table, is vital. Which also is relevant in terms of how I use Medium. I've become quite prolific over the last 3 months as I've been doing more research. I tend to post every day when I'm doing my research as a warm-up exercise for my writing. So often what I'm writing is a train of thought that stretches back all the way through my blog. It's not just about what I'm writing in the moment. And sometimes, occasionally, I might write 2 articles a day because I'm working through issues that I need to explore. The fact that I'm sharing it with a wider audience and people are engaging with that is because I think I found the audience I want to engage with. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do that same process. You might have a far slower output, or that you might only want to post once or twice a week. But finding the groove and the consistency for yourself is really important, because what I'm doing and what I choose to talk about comes from within me, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to work for you. You will find your space, and you will find your niche that works for you. Which brings me on to more general approaches to using Medium as a platform. Finding space for your own voice, I think, is critical. As a writer, I looked at my stats earlier on just to look at the sort of articles which draw in the most people. And it generally tends to be on subjects that are either very in the moment, such as transports, or topics that have a catchy headline. Like the most read article that I've had here on Medium is "Boy, your trans girlfriend doesn't make you gay," which, I mean, I wrote that about a month into me being on the platform, and it's still the most read article I've had. And it's interesting that every time I post a catchy headline about something, it sucks people in and draws people into what I'm writing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those articles are the most personal articles. Often the most personal articles for me are the ones that don't have a big audience. I don't have the most readership. I had a sports injury a couple of weeks ago where I got hit in the chest, and I wrote about it the next day, and I only had 19 people have read it so far in 2 weeks, whereas I wrote one a couple of days after, and it got 2,000. And so it's, for me, that calibration process differentiates between the personal and what I want to write for you as an audience, or what I want to write for my wider audience. And because of the amount I write, I think I've got the space to be able to do that. And it's interesting that the two articles that I've had boosted in the most recent weeks have both been articles on very pertinent trans issues. And I wasn't expecting it. Indeed, the last one that got boosted actually has received fewer viewers than the one I published the next day. So boosting doesn't necessarily get you increased readership, but I do think it actually shows that I'm doing something to pique people's interests. And that brings me on to the next point: is don't just chase what is popular. Certain subjects are very relevant in the moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to pick up those articles, or you have to write an article about that to build your audience. Especially when it comes to trans subjects, so it's very easy to write what you think other people want to read, but often I found that when I'm writing about something that interests me, they've been the articles that have been most engaged with. To a point, I can be a little bit clickbaity with my headlines, especially when I'm doing list type articles. That if I want to get people's attention, having a snappy headline or having something that makes people curious about what I'm going to say in the article is important. But that also doesn't mean that the reader retention is going to be there either. There has to be substance to what I'm writing in order to keep people's attention. And for me, it's the reader retention rate that is just as important as the read rate, because often the articles that keep people's attention are the ones that have that personal narrative woven into it, which then also brings me on to the point of doing your research, because given my job, I do an awful lot of research into trans issues, which is threaded through my writing. My subject area expertise is trans media and trans history more broadly, which makes me a bit of a subject matter expert. However, I also then have to remember that there isn't one trans narrative. There are so many different narratives out there that I can only see the very small edge of that. So when I'm writing about it, one of the things I've been trying to do over the last couple of months is bringing in trans folk who aren't necessarily in the zeitgeist or in the moment. I did a piece over Pride Month about I think it was 5 or 6 historic trans figures. And for me, I'm very familiar with them. All of them are relevant to the writing. And it was interesting that people gave me feedback that they weren't aware of over half of those people on that list. So it's telling that, especially the way I'm writing, that by doing this research and bringing those voices to the table, it's enabling other people to find out about issues and concepts that for me are very familiar, but they're not necessarily familiar about it. So when you're writing, don't be afraid to share your expertise. Don't be afraid to bring your own perspective and your own voice to the table. Often, when people are reading and writing what you're saying, they could have a light bulb moment and go, right, I hadn't thought about that, or I hadn't considered those issues the way I did. The article I wrote about myself and being a trans sports player, the comments underneath were really interesting because there was one negative comment, but the rest were very inspiring for me, because they were showing me that I was bringing perspectives to the table that other people hadn't necessarily thought about. And that's always really nice to see for me as a writer, because it's showing that I'm making people think and I'm giving people that space to explore an idea that they wouldn't necessarily engage with. More broadly, outside of just the writing techniques, it's like how I build my audience. I came back to Medium in January after being away for about a year, and with the intention that I want to build an audience for talking about trans issues in the round. And as such, I tend to use Reddit as my go-to place to post most of my articles. So a lot of my readership will, I think about 80% of my readership come from Reddit, outside of Medium. And it's very interesting that often there'll be a conversation on Reddit about what I'm writing, that explores the issues I'm talking about in a way that on Medium doesn't happen. So I'm drawing people in who wouldn't necessarily be your average Medium reader. And the same goes to Twitter. I don't use Twitter as much. And as the keynote speaker earlier on mentioned, Twitter is kind of dying, yet there is still quite a large trans positive conversation going on Reddit, on Twitter, that you don't necessarily see in other mediums. And so by sharing it on both platforms, I'm drawing people in who wouldn't necessarily come through Medium directly. So when you try and build your audience, don't necessarily think that platforms like Reddit or Twitter should be excluded. They're worth doing, but you have to engage with them in a very particular way in order to get work for it. And the same goes for Medium as well. I use Medium for a particular purpose, which is to get my voice out there, which I don't necessarily want to get paid to be on Medium. I am a premium member, but I'm not on here as a professional writer. I'm on here because I'm an academic. I want to explore ideas. I want to think through the process. And as such, I use it differently from other people. So when you're writing on the platform, have a specific reason in mind you're doing it. If you want to build an audience because you want to get paid, that's very different from if you just want to build an audience for your writing. I deliberately don't put my writing behind a paywall on Medium because I want to build the biggest audience possible. And for me, that is the cross-pollination between different platforms. Other people have different perspectives and other people have different needs from Medium. But for me, it's that consistency of keeping the daily writing going, keeping my writing muscles working, making sure that I'm putting out consistently good work and that the quality is always there in whatever I put forward. And if I don't feel like I can put the quality out, I won't write, which is really important, especially when you're doing cross-platform links. I'm a British person. My spelling is very British. My punctuation is very British. My writing, my media consumption is very British. Yet my audience tends to be American primarily. So a lot of my idioms, a lot of my concepts, I've drawn from a British background, which might not necessarily be immediately relatable, but that's me drawing on my personal history. One of the things that Medium started doing is being giving people the option to get your articles emailed. And it's interesting how while people are signing up and following me, and I've been growing that over the last year or so, the number of people who are signing up for my emails and then reading my articles on a daily basis has also been slowly increasing. And that core group of readers is really lovely to see, because I see there's a regular group of people who comment and like my work. And it's really interesting how they interact with my writing and how I'm impacting what they're saying. And that core audience is really lovely to just engage with on a daily basis, which then comes to the argument of consistency. My niche is trans issues and feminism. Most of what I post will be about that. And I think the audience I'm building are expecting me to tackle those sort of subjects. I'm trying to be consistent in my approach to the writing. I am evolving as a writer and a researcher. If you look back about a year ago, my writing is very different from what it is now. And I'm sure in a year's time, a lot of the thoughts and processes I'm having are very much like that. So the best piece of advice I can give you is be consistent in your voice, in your approach, in your tone, in your posting, and don't take your audience for granted. Don't assume they're always going to be there for you, because ultimately they're there because they want to be there. And there's so many other writers that they could engage with, but they're choosing to engage with you, especially people who choose to follow you and especially people who choose to get you by email, they're inviting you into their inbox. And that's actually a privilege for me. It's giving me a space to touch people and touch people's minds that I wouldn't have had a year ago. And finally, post regularly. Don't feel the pressure to post every day like I do. Post at a time frame that's workable for you. If your life is complex and you can only post once a week, post once a week. But do it in a way where people can sit down and read what you're saying in a consistent way, and give people a space to engage with you that isn't just ad hoc. Do it in a way that also helps you and structures your week and structures your writing process. So, has anybody got any questions? Okay, I'll just continue then. I think one of the biggest things as well as a trans writer on Medium is there is a big difference between writing for a broader audience and then writing for the trans community. And this is something which I'm having to be more conscious of over the last couple of months. I'm finding that when I engage with the trans community, they tend to be a lot more critical of what I'm writing. Whereas though the audience members who I have who are outside of the trans community either don't give feedback or tend to give more neutral feedback about my writing. And because I'm not just writing for a trans readership, I'm trying to write for a broader readership, I have to bear that in mind when I'm writing. And you'll see this, I tend to couch my writing quite succinctly. And I tend to find that as I'm writing, as I'm developing my ideas, it is with a broader audience in mind. It's not just with a trans readership. And sometimes this can lead to quite heavy critiquing. And other times, actually, that critiquing is useful and helpful. And on other times, I have to stop myself getting defensive. I have to just remember, actually, this is a matter of perspective. It's a matter of understanding. It's a matter of being honest with myself and honest with the people around me. I always come from a position of good faith. When I write, it's always done from a position of this is who I am. I don't set out just to please other people with my writing. And so if people engage with it and people want to be part of that process, then I'm inviting them into my writing and I want them to be there, but I'm not necessarily writing for any one person or one particular group. I want to be as broad as I can and give people a space to engage with as much as I can. So by all means, feel free to hit me up on my articles. Feel free to send me a personal message on Medium. I'm always very open and always appreciate feedback. So if you're interested in seeing my writing, I will love to get any response or feedback you might have. So has anybody got any final questions? Okay, well, thank you for attending. I appreciate you coming. And hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of your day. Catch you later. Bye.